Welcome to the Mutual Success Podcast, where we hear how entrepreneurs and extraordinary sales professionals are helping each other, their clients, their communities, and maybe even saving the world. I had a great time interviewing Ben Holmes, CEO and founder of Nanochon, a revolutionary company that is repairing people's knee cartilage in a way that is far superior to any other approach that's ever been taken in the history of mankind. You'll find Ben is a very interesting, engaging guy who's got a lot of great experience starting when he was young, and he's done everything he can to build a company that helps people's quality of life well into their later years, despite the inevitable aging of our joints and other aches and pains. I had a great time talking to him, and I know you're going to enjoy listening to our little interview. Thanks for tuning in, and listen to Ben Holmes.
Anyway, that's what's up. And ring, ring. Ben, good to see you today.
Yeah, good to see you too, Stephen. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much. I'm a little bit nervous since this is my inaugural podcast of the Mutual Success series. And, I'm really excited that I was able to meet you in your investment presentation and find out more about you as I have. So hopefully today we'll be spending a few minutes talking about your background, since one of my main interests is as a successful entrepreneur at such an early stage is how you got there, how you began to build your ethical framework, a little bit about challenges that you've had in those regards. Talk about your company, the problems that you address, how you've gone about doing it, and last but not least, the investment proposition and how it aims to create not just a great company supporting yourself and employees, as well as other stakeholders such as the doctors, but the people that you're going to be treating, to bring them a lot of wealth as time goes on in different ways. So why don't we start off by talking for a few minutes about your background and what got you interested in what I see, on the surface, and what we've talked about so far is ethics, engineering, healthcare, and entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. Yeah. Happy to get right into it. And by the way, I just want to say I'm very honored to be your first guest. So happy to be helping you kick off this little project here, Stephen. So my background has primarily been as a scientist and a researcher. My undergraduate degree was in mechanical engineering. I always knew that I wanted to do something in medical devices or in biotech. But after 4 years of engineering, I was kind of done with school for a little while. So I went to go work for, a typical kind of large design build construction firm. So, I mean, you see these all over New York, you see them all over any city. I mean, they're, large companies that one would hire to basically develop property and build, a large complex project like a apartment building or retail high rise or, those types of projects. And, I very quickly hated it, to basically put it bluntly. And I think that, it's important work. I mean, we certainly need people that are, knowledgeable and highly skilled and technical to do all types of things in this world. But I just immediately knew that it was not going to fulfill me in any kind of deeper way. And that was something that was, honestly kind of important to me, or maybe I always knew it was important to me, but like I said, I kind of put it on the back burner because I just, was tired of school and needed a break. So, after a shorter break than I had planned, I started to think about, how could I really kind of get into the medical space, and, really entry-level positions require a master's degree. So I kind of thought to myself, okay, I'll go back to grad school, I'll get a master's degree, and then I'll go work for, like a Pfizer or a Medtronic, or depending on the work I end up doing, go work for a big company and be part of the team that designs new medical products. And where things kind of surprised me again was after about a year of working in a lab at the George Washington University that was doing what's called tissue engineering. And it was one of the fields that I was interested in, but I kind of applied to programs all over the country that were doing all kinds of different stuff, because I frankly was a little bit directionless. I wanted to get into the space, and I was like, there's a handful of things that I might be interested in doing, and I just happened to end up, at GW and in this lab doing tissue engineering. And so for those that aren't familiar, I mean, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's basically rebuilding body parts. So, our lab was particularly focused on essentially trying to design materials, polymers, using natural materials, using nanomaterials, basically anything we could sort of get our hands on to try to create constructs that would actually influence cells to regrow tissue. And, in our case, we were working a lot with stem cells. So trying to create these structures, which are referred to as scaffolds. So the technical term is scaffolding. And in the tissue engineering context, a scaffold is any structure that helps guide cellular growth and mature tissue development. So we were, designing scaffolds to try to regenerate bone and cartilage, and really looking at joint health as an application of tissue engineering. And after about a year and a half of doing that work, I just really fell in love with it, and I really kind of fell in love with research and development. And so I was very happy that my professor was happy with the work that I was doing and was willing to take me on as a PhD student. So then I became a PhD student and worked on a variety of projects, and kind of delved much deeper into the space. And what I kind of found was, as I got deeper into the research side, I did realize that I didn't want to be in academia. Again, this is not any type of a value statement or a judgment statement, but really, I mean, the point of academia is to develop these technologies at a really, really early stage, disseminate the information about what they've developed, and then move on to the next project. And so I kind of looked at that and I thought, wow, we're doing this incredible work, and the ultimate goal of this work is just to publish some papers and then maybe help my professor get another research grant, to do another project, to just kind of move on. And I kind of felt like I'd really love to see this stuff actually reach the clinic and actually treat patients. Actually turn into something that's actually going to benefit real people, which should be the ultimate goal. And so that was really what kind of led me to entrepreneurship, as a path for me and a path for the work we were doing. As I said, academia and laboratory environments, I mean, there certainly are exceptions. There are labs that are very, very good at spinning out technology and actually standing up companies to commercialize the technology, but there's really only a few of them, I would say. And so for the most part, you either need to have something that is so groundbreaking that a major Fortune 500 company is willing to take it on and then develop it into a product, or you have to do a startup. Because for the most part, large companies in the space are not in the business of really developing new technologies from the ground up. So, certainly people that are not knowledgeable in biotech entrepreneurship have asked me, why isn't Stryker or Smith and Nephew or Medtronic just licensing this now? And it's because they're really not set up to take the risk of early development, and they're not set up from a financial perspective to actually wait the amount of time it takes to build these things into products, to test them, to get clinical data, to get FDA approval. And so that was really kind of what I was faced with. Like you mentioned ethical capital a couple times now. I mean, from an ethical standpoint, if I really cared about seeing that end result of this going into people and actually impacting them, really there was no other option other than to be an entrepreneur and actually build the company. So I certainly will say,
right. If I could pause, if I could just
please.
pause you for 1 second. Your thirst for the sustained attention of a project that takes it to the very end reminds me of one thing I saw in your bio, which you were an Eagle Scout. So to me, that's literally doing something where you bring it to fruition for the greater community in a way that, hey, God bless academics, and it's necessary for people that fits into. But in your case, you have this longer term view that made it ethical for you to be a good steward to what your intentions were, right?
I'm really glad you brought that up because, I do think that being an Eagle Scout is something that actually has kind of informed this approach that I've taken to life and also to this project. For those who aren't familiar, Eagle Scout is the highest rank in the Boy Scouts of America. And in order to become an Eagle Scout, you have to basically undertake a community development project, from conception to execution to finish. And you're required to have 100 man hours minimum to complete the project. And actually, it still is a point of I don't want to say contention, but there's a lot of joking among my friend group to this day, because our project actually ended up taking 600 man hours. So, definitely we ended up really overachieving, I think. And I don't necessarily know if that ended up being the best decision, but no, it was truly a character building kind of experience. And so, yeah, I think that sort of, being able to take the long view, but then also being able to kind of manage and adapt and really kind of keep your eye on the prize in terms of what is the point of this. I think Steve Blank is someone also who talks really eloquently about this, and he's a very successful software entrepreneur, but also he helped develop the National Science Foundation's I-Corps program, which is actually a program that we went through when we first started the company. And so I-Corps is basically like an accelerator, or they even sometimes refer to it as a pre-accelerator that the National Science Foundation runs. And the idea is that it takes technical people that have invented a technology and it teaches them how to be business minded and think like an entrepreneur. And Steve Blank is someone who always says in his coursework that being an entrepreneur and building a company, just on paper, it's one of the hardest ways to make money. If all you care about is making money, there's much better professions to do that. And he talks a lot about how like making money, at least for the entrepreneur, the people building the company, is almost it's almost a side effect, because really the true goal is to build something that goes into the market and then creates value for the people that use it. And in our case, that value is much better outcomes for people that suffer from knee cartilage damage, whether it's a traumatic injury or osteoarthritis, which is frankly going to be the majority of our patients.
Okay, hold on a second. Hold on. Let's talk about the problem first before we get into the grand climax.
Yeah, perfect.
So yeah. Let's talk about cartilage, because it's a really special material that does some really important things, and it's got some mechanical properties that make it perfect for what it does, but it also, because of those same properties, makes it very difficult to repair. So talk about the problem of cartilage, specifically in the knee, which is what the area you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So our skeletal system is very complex mechanically, and it's made up primarily of two categories of tissue. There's hard tissue, and so that's bone or bone analogous tissues that have calcium in them that essentially gives them their hard, durable properties. And then there's soft tissue, and soft tissues are all generally considered cartilaginous, so they're all referred to something that's referred to as cartilage. There's different types of cartilage, and different types of cartilage perform different functions. So like your nose and ears are made of cartilage. The tendons and ligaments, which are basically what attaches muscles to bone or attaches bones to each other. Those are type of cartilage. And then, as you pointed out, especially in joints, there's something that's referred to as articular cartilage, or sometimes called hyaline cartilage as well. And so hyaline cartilage is the cartilage that makes the surface of the joint. So, in the hip, in the knee, in the ankle, in your hands, in your feet, all of the joints are not just bones that touch each other. The bones are capped by this cartilage surface. That's anywhere from 1 millimeter to several millimeters thick. So it's a relatively thin tissue, but it creates this surface. And as you pointed out, cartilage has very specialized, especially articular cartilage has very specialized mechanical properties. So it's designed to both act as a shock absorber. So it allows the joint to undergo impact, and the bones don't immediately break or get damaged. And then the cartilage also provides a low friction surface, which means, especially in something like the knee, you can have impact and sliding. So the knee can be, it wants to be in motion, and can withstand, millions and millions of cycles, which is sort of remarkable. But because of that, there are things biologically about cartilage tissues that really limit them, as people live a longer life and put more wear and tear on their joints. And primarily, articular cartilage is what's referred to as avascular, which means that it literally has no blood vessels in it. And the kind of thought is that from an evolutionary perspective, that means that cartilage can withstand these impacts, and that mostly the exchange between the cells that are alive in cartilage, how they get food and how they expel waste, is sort of just through diffusion, so through the joint fluid that's in the joint space. But the reason that's important is because
is that the synovial fluid?
Yeah, the synovial fluid. Yeah, the synovial fluid. So, the inside of the joint is also full of this, literally fluid called synovial fluid. And yeah, so basically pressure causes fluid to basically move in and out of the tissue rather than the way that literally the rest of your body works, which is that you have a network of blood vessels. And so because of that, cartilage also has very few cells in it. It's actually like one of the least densely populated tissues in the body. And those two things basically mean that cartilage, unlike other tissues, has no capacity to heal itself. So like you cut yourself, you might bleed, it might hurt, but the wound closes up and new skin forms. Cartilage literally can't do that, even with a small injury or defect. And that means that certainly if you hurt yourself, so if you fall and you twist your knee, or you get in an accident and you tear a piece of the cartilage off, it's gone. But in our arthritic patients, which is really the bulk of the people that are getting these cartilage injuries, it's a slower process, but the result is the same. Mechanical wear over time causes these divots or these potholes to form in the cartilage, and the body has no ability to heal that hole. And so the hole eventually gets big enough, and people start to feel pain and stiffness in their knee. They go to the doctor, they get imaged or they get scoped, and the doctor finds this big pothole and refers them to a surgeon to get it fixed. Because really, at that point, your options are just be on pain medication until the damage gets so severe that you need a knee replacement. There are some things like injections. So there's hyaluronic acid injections. There's another thing that's become popular is PRP, which is platelet-rich plasma. I mean, these are things that basically kind of mitigate the pain and can kind of reduce inflammation, but they don't do anything to rebuild that pothole. So the problem still persists. And then there's some things on the market now to try to actually rebuild the cartilage, but they really entail the grafting of either live tissue from a cadaver. So, I mean, literally patients will get on an organ donor list, and they'll wait for an organ donor to come up that they can get cartilage. And that could take up to a year to get that as a treatment. And then there are these cell therapy products. So there are some companies that have tried to develop these cell therapies where they try to put live cells into the joint to try to grow the cartilage, but they don't really work very well. And then also they're extremely expensive. So, they're anywhere from $10,000 to $60,000 for the most expensive one. And that's just for the treatment. That's not for the surgery. That's not for, the hospital stay. That's literally just the cost of the therapy. And for context, a knee replacement costs like around $5,000 or $6,000. So, in a world where people are having a lot of pain, they're sometimes going through years of multiple treatments to try to really just slow the cartilage damage, and then eventually they're going to get to a point where they need a knee replacement anyway. I mean, that's creating a lot of cost for the patient. That's a lot of lost time working, a lot of time having to recover, spending up to a year in rehab for some of these therapies to actually get any kind of an outcome. And then you might have to get a knee replacement within 5 years anyway. And then from a cost perspective, I mean, these things have kind of spotty coverage in terms of insurance. I mean, it really just comes down to like, where do you live and who is your insurer? And then there's enormous cost burden to the system. So, the time is so right for a solution like what Nanochon is doing, which is that we've really thought about the patient. We've thought about how are we going to actually address cartilage damage and actually have a better outcome for truly a better outcome for the patient. But then we've also really thought very specifically about how are we going to make this thing affordable and easy to access. And that's really kind of the 1-2 punch of what we're doing. I mean, yes, absolutely. It's very clear that people need better outcomes. They need to be able to recover much quicker. And so we are talking about, the Nanochon approach. People could potentially be fully recovered within 2 or 3 months rather than 8 to 12 months. So you get to go back to your life relatively quickly. But then also something that actually really preserves those tissues in the joint, actually stops the arthritic degeneration with a better high quality tissue. And that's the key to real longevity. Because if you don't get the proper cartilage, one of the reasons why all these things have limited long-term outcomes is that if you don't get the right cartilage, the bone continues to undergo stress and it continues to degenerate. And that's the type of, yes.
To talk a little bit about, before we go into that and the side effects of an improper treatment, talk a little bit more about how when you came across this technology in your research, and what caused you to say, wow, this might be able to take me somewhere with cartilage?
Yeah, absolutely. So the academic world has primarily been focused on a type of material called a hydrogel. And so collagen, which is the main natural component that makes up cartilage, is a hydrogel. There are also synthetic hydrogels, but basically a hydrogel is a polymer material that really likes to take on water and kind of like a sponge swells with water. Actually, something that almost everybody's familiar with is, those little toys you get when you're a kid, and it's like a dinosaur or something, and it'll be kind of like the size of a coin, and then you soak it in the sink and it balloons up really big. That's a hydrogel.
Yep.
That's a hydrogel. So they're these polymer materials that swell with water, and cartilage is a great example. I think cartilage is anywhere from 80 to 90% water. There's a whole class of materials, and for a very long time, researchers were just really focused on hydrogels, because it's the same. It's kind of like a simple logical through line. Like cartilage is a hydrogel, so we should just be trying to grow stuff on hydrogels or make things out of hydrogels. But synthetic hydrogels and even collagen, it's very hard to get good what's called bulk properties. So that's like, if you actually have a big piece of this, how does it behave versus how does it behave as a thin film or like in the Petri dish when you're trying to grow cells on it. And that's mainly because the structure of natural collagen that the chondrocytes build is extremely complex. It's much more complex than.
And the chondrocytes, just to go back, the chondrocytes, which I think may be where you got the name Nanochon, they're the little cells, parts of our body that go in there, and they may form components or maybe rebuild some of the cartilage.
Yeah, that's correct. So that is the technical name for the type of cell that's existing within the cartilage. And they're sort of like a leftover of embryonic development. I mean, we could have a whole hour podcast just on that, so I won't get too deep in that, but that's basically like why they exist, because when a fetus is developing, the whole skeleton is cartilage essentially, and then it kind of calcifies and turns into bone, and the chondrocytes are sort of what is left over especially after you grow, and they can kind of maintain cartilage like in a very limited way, like literally on like the biological scale. They can sort of like maintain the structure, but they can't regrow like a millimeters or a centimeter size thing on their own. So, but basically, all of this research has been going into looking at hydrogels and trying to entice chondrocyte growth on hydrogels. And my co-founder and I were sort of basically looking at alternative materials. I mean, we had really kind of, I would say, had like a more radical approach to all of the projects we were doing. It wasn't just specific to cartilage, but really kind of looking at, really breaking it down and saying, what are we trying to accomplish when we try to design these materials or design these structures and manufacture them? And are there like new and creative ways that we can try to address the issues? And so one of those was actually looking at like non-hydrogel materials for cartilage. And so basically saying we're going to look at materials that have the right mechanical properties in terms of those bulk properties, and then also have structures that mimic the collagen, but they don't have to be hydrogels. And so we started working with what's now the Nanochon material, which is basically a composite of a couple different things, but it's basically this what's called a thermoplastic. So it's a plastic that melts at high temperatures. That's everything that's like a plastic part that's injection molded. Is almost usually a thermoplastic. So it's definitely something that people have not really looked at for cartilage, but this particular composite, like I said, had cartilage matched mechanical properties. It does kind of take on water, again, not to the extent of a hydrogel, but it will actually kind of it'll take on water, it will soften. So it doesn't swell up, but it actually takes on cartilage properties. And then we're 3D printing it. And I think that's also a really unique element of what we're doing. And there are people that are also using 3D printing, but again, it's primarily to kind of like use these fancy machines to deposit materials that have cells in them to try to sort of like, manufacture a living tissue. Whereas for us, 3D printing is a way for us to make this intricate structure that would be impossible to injection mold, but we can make it cheaply and easily. Because the type of 3D printing that uses a thermoplastic, I mean, if you have a MakerBot or if you've ever worked with like a hobbyist machine, a 3D printer that you could just buy off of Amazon and have on your desk. I mean, that's the type of technology we're using. We have a nicer version of that can be used for high quality production, but it's the same technology. It's just basically a robot head moves around in space and squirts out hot plastics. So that means that it informs this structure that cells really like to grow into. It's made of this material that's durable enough that as soon as you implant it, people can be. You couldn't go out and play sports, but people can be walking on it and rehabbing right away rather than kind of waiting the traditional 8 to 12 weeks. And it very quickly gets tissue to regrow, and it gets the body's own cells to actually repopulate and grow the cartilage. Where, as I kind of talked about earlier, these existing high-end therapies, you extract cells from the patient or you extract them from a cadaver tissue and you grow them in a lab somewhere. You kind of make this construct and then you provide that to the surgeon. Whereas we're saying we've got something that on its own can cause the body's own cells to repopulate. And that basically means that the implant is a totally low cost off the shelf product. And that's really the big breakthrough. I think not just that we're just seeing much faster, much higher quality cartilage grow, but the fact that the implant is like this relatively affordable, easy to access implant. So, to kind of like really walk through the patient care continuum. Let's say that you've got, an advanced stage 3, osteochondral lesion. Your doctor prescribes a cadaveric allograft. So you've just gone through, probably a couple weeks of trying to get everything scheduled, getting into the doctor and getting imaged. And then it's probably taken the doctor a week to follow up with you. So you've probably been trying to address your knee pain for about a month now. And then the doctor says, we're going to do cadaveric allograft. We're going to put you on the wait list. And it's probably going to take, 4 to 8 months for us to get that graft. So now you're walking around, you're probably on pain meds. You might be if it's severe enough, you might be on crutches too. Because the doctors really don't want the damage to spread. And so they might actually recommend that you be in like an offloading brace and be on crutches. So you're trying to live your life. You can't exercise, really hard to like have a social life. Maybe it's hard to even go to work. You're walking around on crutches. And then in 8 months, this thing comes, they do the surgery, they put it in your knee. And then you basically go through a month-long extensive rehab period. And then it's going to take probably 6 to 7 months for you to be fully rehabbed. So at this point, you've been trying to address this problem for what, almost 3 years potentially, if the longest time stacks occur. I mean, that's considered the gold standard today. And then on top of all of it, it's going to be close to a $25,000 to $50,000 cost. Because the surgery was expensive, all this rehab was expensive, getting the cadaveric allograft is expensive, and your insurance probably covers it, but then you probably still have a copay. You're probably looking at, anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 out of pocket to cover all this. I mean, this is nonsense. Like this.
And that's the standard of care now, right? Which every doctor uses as the primary way of addressing it.
I wouldn't even say this is the standard of care. I would say this is the best option. This is like, if you're like, okay, I'm really going to commit to doing this. I mean, the standard of care is really still, I would say palliative care, and then something that's called a microfracture surgery, which is a non-implantation approach to treating these injuries. It's a simple procedure, but a lot of people have stopped doing it because there's actually clinical data that shows that it makes arthritis worse. So it
hurts me just hearing the name.
Yeah. It's pretty nasty. And so it's also possible that if you're an allograft patient, you maybe had a failed microfracture prior to this too. And that would be, sort of, again, a couple month process to get diagnosed. The microfracture can be done quickly, but then it's also like an 8-month recovery time. And then it fails within 1 to 2 years because the arthritic degeneration of the bone persists. So, and so that's another thing to think about too. If you're getting cadaveric allograft, you maybe already have had an additional surgery before this. And the cell therapy products are not much better. I mean, the only thing they really address is they kind of shorten that time to treatment. So it usually takes 2 months to get the graft. So you kind of shave that 3-year process maybe down to like, 2.5 or 2 years. But, still, all of this it's just such a mess. It's so hard for patients to even get these treatments because there's such inconsistent coverage. And it's also so hard to source them. Like it's just a huge bottleneck getting tissue. And to give you a sense of like really how bad the bottleneck is, there's around 700,000 knee arthroscopies every year. So that's just arthroscopies on the knee on these people that are, pre-knee replacement. There's maybe like 25 to 30,000 tissue and cell product treatments done a year. So that's all the different brands of cell therapy and cadaveric allograft added up. There's only like 30,000 procedures done a year in the US. So you got 700,000 patients that need treatment. You've got 30,000 of them actually getting treatment. So, I mean, that's really the big problem we're solving here. I mean, for the patient, it's just being able to get treated quickly and knowing it's going to be reliable and knowing that you really are probably not going to have any treatment for ideally the rest of your life, but maybe it is one treatment and then a couple decades later you might need a knee replacement or you might need one of these other things. And for the surgeon, and I think this also can't be really understated, for the surgeon, it's really the ability to just do a lot more cases. A good surgeon probably does 15 cadaveric allografts a year. When we've been out in the world talking to our potential customer, talking to these sports medicine specialists, they all say that they think they could easily do like 200 or more Nanochon procedures a year. So I think
wow.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what happens in the operating room, and then talk about the clinicals that you've done on your animals and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, another thing we've really focused on is trying to make this arthroscopic. And that's really important for the patient because, arthroscopic surgery. And so for those that aren't familiar with the term, I mean, this is basically a minimally invasive camera guided surgery. So instead of like opening the whole knee up and exposing the surface to try to make a repair or install an implant, the surgeon makes 3 small incisions, anywhere from sub-centimeter to like a couple centimeters. And so there's one for the camera. So small arthroscopic cameras inserted through one incision. There's another incision just for a saline port. So they like to pump saline through because it basically washes everything out of the joint as they're cutting stuff up and debriding things. And then the third is what's called the working channel. And that's just for like where you're going to get instruments in, if you're going to like remove diseased cartilage or if you're going to prep an area to receive an implant. So, small incisions. That's really good for the patient because it significantly limits the risk of infection. So that's really important. And then the other reason arthroscopy is good for the patient is because you're not disturbing all the muscles and the ligaments around the joint, so recovery is much easier. So, these are the reasons why arthroscopy is always better for the patient. And then for surgeons, it can be done in a more limited environment. So it can be done almost always can be done in an ambulatory surgery center rather than in a full OR. And that, reduces the cost and also, again, allows them to do these much more quickly because they can usually have their own ASC or partner with an ASC. So it's much better for the surgeon as well. And basically, it's generally a pretty quick procedure. Like if you were going to have a microfracture done, that's like a 10 to 15 minute procedure. So the surgeon just basically makes the incisions for the instruments. They do the procedure and then they close you up. It's pretty straightforward. For allograft or cell therapy, that's where it gets a lot more complicated. Allograft is not so hard to do because these allografts basically come as like a plug, basically like a big like thimble sized plug. And so they really are just coring out the hole and then popping the plug in. That's not so hard. That's usually like 20 to 30 minutes because they just, the one thing that is they have to have precise like machining of the hole. So if the hole doesn't fit right with this thing that's made of bone and living cartilage, then it won't work. So usually it takes a little longer just because they have to prep the hole. But the cell therapy products are a lot more complicated. And that's because there's usually an element of fragility to those products. They're either kind of like morsels or jellies or like films or things that are not as robust even as like a piece of cartilage is. And so they usually have to be done open because it can be hard to get the material into the joint. And so there are like some like the best surgeons in the world like will do some of these things arthroscopically because they've like kind of developed and trialed and errored their own procedure, but it's not usually common practice. And then also they require what's called fibrin glue, which is basically a surgical adhesive. So it's like a biocompatible, biodegradable glue. And that can't be used wet. It basically has to be used in a dry environment. So you either have to kind of like drain and dry the joint to try to like get the glue in there, or most people are just like screw that, I'm not spending the time and energy. So then they just do an open procedure. But then you have to wait for the glue to dry. And so, for the patient, that means making recovery a lot more complicated. And again, for the surgeon, these are time consuming, complicated procedures, comparatively speaking. So they can only do less of them. And I think the only reason why people haven't really been so vocal about it is because, as I touched on, there are all these bottlenecks with cost and logistics. So it's not like, surgeons aren't doing hundreds of cell therapy products a year, and so they're not really like feeling that effect. But all of them say that if there's something that they're going to do a lot of, they want it to be something that's fast and simple. And so that's really where our implant also, I think, fits in well. Is kind of the third benefit is that, as I mentioned, we don't use a hydrogel. We use this kind of like more robust material. It has complexity engineered into it, but that basically means that the implant is very easy to handle. So we've done a bunch of these labs now, training labs where surgeons have been able to open up the device. It's very flexible, so you can definitely like kind of grasp it or fold it or pinch it and just pop it through that working channel. And then also the surgeon can trim it to fit the defect. So if they have an implant that's not the right size, or if the defect is like really irregular and they don't want to just core it out as a circle, they can cut our implant and shape it. And so all of that just makes the process way easier for them. And again, that's better for the patient because, you're not under as long, the infection risk goes down even lower. And then, not having to go to an open procedure again means that your recovery is going to be shorter and much easier. So all of those things are just really, really adding a lot of value to the surgeon and to the patient.
Excellent. So I know you've done some trials on rodents, goats, and horses, and talk about that a little bit, and then talk about your plans, and then the investment proposition.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, any type of medical device or implant development is always one that's very iterative, and so I mean, the way you really need to do that, and the way the FDA wants to see it done as well, for eventual approvals, is through animal models. So, our very first study was in rodents, as you said, and that was really just going from testing the material and testing some early prototypes in a Petri dish environment where, you're basically just kind of growing one or two types of cells on it, to actually seeing what a complex biological environment does, and also see if there's any like immune or safety risk. So, the implant was very, very simple. It was basically just an effort to get material into the rodent's knee. But basically what we showed is that, I think really interestingly, the material actually doesn't elicit any type of foreign body or rejection. So even things that are used today will initially have some sort of response from the immune system or from the body where they say, hey, this is a foreign material. We're going to start to break it down or wall it off or encapsulate it. And that could be a normal process of tissue rebuilding. But I think what we've shown is that if you don't have that happen at all, you just get immediate ingrowth. And so we get really, really rapid cell migration into the implant and onto the material. And then you get this regeneration happening a lot more quickly. And then in the rodent study, we also showed that you do get both bone and cartilage. So that's really important for kind of, proper healing, is that the bone bonds to it in the right way. But then also you do get this cartilage start to develop. So with that data, we went out and got federal funding, which again is very typical for these early stage device companies. It usually takes many years before you have de-risked enough to bring on investors, right? So the next step was we got larger federal funding to do this goat study. And that was really like, okay, we've got, a version of the device that we think we can carry through into humans. We've got a version of a surgical procedure, which is probably what the human procedure will be like, but we're really still trying to understand, like, does this even work at all in the way we think it will? And, large animals are important because, the mechanical loading on the joint, that's an important part of how healing happens. And so it's important to model that in this particular application. So that's why we had to go to a larger animal. And that was the study where we really showed that you do get the hyaline cartilage. So it was a study that went out longer than the rodent study. You're also in this large animal that has a larger joint, is putting weight on it. And we showed that, you get the right type of cartilage and it grows really fast. So that was the second study. And then the third study, as you said, was horses. And this has really been our, I guess what I would qualify as our like true efficacy study. So, we worked pretty extensively with, the veterinary group that did the study for us. They actually are horse sports medicine surgeons. So they are surgeons. They're not just like a testing company. Yeah. And then also we worked pretty closely with human clinicians to get feedback. And so this is where we sort of designed a truly arthroscopic approach. All the surgeries on the horses were done as an arthroscopy, kind of with a perfected delivery. And then I think the other thing that's really important is this is also a study where it's like we're doing a horse is very large and heavy. So it's kind of become a popular kind of like de-risking study for these types of things going into humans because it truly is weight and stress that will actually show, like, is this thing going to fail in humans or not? And then the other thing that's really important about the horse study and why the horse model I think can be really important is that horses will actually develop arthritis. So it's always kind of been a blind spot of goats and sheep, which have been the more traditional, pre-human model the FDA wants to see, is that yes, you can create a big defect in the cartilage and see if cartilage grows, and you can show it's better than the control, but they don't really get arthritic degeneration. Horses develop arthritis. So if you create these defects, they will get arthritis if they're not adequately treated. And so in the horse study, we've got a Nanochon treatment group and we've got a microfracture group. I want to kind of go back to that because I mentioned early on that one of the reasons why microfracture and even some of these other treatments don't last a long time, it's not because the cartilage wears out again. It's because the bone continues to degenerate. And so in this horse...
Well, also, you're compromising the structural integrity anytime you're deliberately breaking something, right? I mean, this is designed to be solid, not fractures in it. And then, to heal it, you're breaking it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And the horse, the horse is just a much higher stress environment. And so in the horse study that we did, the microfracture group actually saw arthritic degeneration. It saw the same type of arthritic degeneration that makes microfracture and other things lead to knee replacement later on. And that's really critical because in the Nanochon group, we did not see that at all. So in addition to seeing nice cartilage, confirming that this is getting cartilage, that it's integrating properly, we also show that the bone is totally normal. And that really is the key for really showing real efficacy. And so I think that this flows well into your other statement or question, which was now talk about Nanochon as an investment. In the past, a lot of people have tried to develop things for this type of cartilage treatment. And there certainly have been people that have tried biomaterials. As I mentioned, a lot of them have focused on hydrogels. But I think the important distinction is that, a lot of people kind of did quick animal studies, or they maybe did like a sheep study or something. And they showed, we get cartilage, and they raised a bunch of money and they tried to do it in humans and it didn't work in humans. Because once you get into humans, it's all about showing does pain reduce or not. And if pain doesn't reduce, it's because you didn't protect the bone. That's ultimately what is causing people pain. It's the stress to the bone and it's changes in the bone. The cartilage actually feels no pain. So if you don't preserve the bone, you're going to have pain and there's going to be no effect. We've now shown in a state-of-the-art animal model, which is the horse, where you actually do get this bone degeneration, which is indicative of what happens in people. We stop that from happening. And so I think that is really the key. Why is this the right time, not just in the market? I think I did a very thorough job of telling why this is a great time clinically and in the market, because the problem's never been bigger. There's still no good options for people, and surgeons are desperate for better solutions. But when people say, how do you know this is going to work when so many other things have not worked? It's because we showed that. I don't know of anyone who's shown that, including things that are on the market today, that did not show this type of bone preservation. And so I think, for people that are thinking about investing, this is a tremendously de-risked technology, and it is ready to go in humans. That's what we are raising to do now. I mean, we are planning on going to a human trial, early to mid next year. So that's what money will be going to support. And then in terms of the investment opportunity, there's really two reasons why people should consider it. I mean, one is just the ability to get a phenomenal return. We've run a variety of calculations through a number of scenarios, and basically with the type of exit we're expecting in the time frame we're expecting, investors can expect around a 30x. And if you ask anybody who...
Well, before you, excuse me for a second, and by the way, no guarantees from the management, me or anyone else, but talk a little bit about the addressable market. I know it's in the billions of dollars in just the knee, and there's other things that potentially your product could be used for. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're right. The first application, the indication we're pursuing is in the knee. That's a $2 billion market in the US annually. So that's just the knee. That's just the first product. But treating the same types of injuries in other joints would be like kind of the next no-brainer application, because these same types of large lesions also occur in other large joints. So they occur in the hip, the ankle, and the shoulder very frequently. And so we've estimated that's close to a $4 billion market annually. And then because the technology is so adaptable and scalable, meaning not just we can do higher volumes, but we can actually do much larger, like literal volumes. Like we can make larger implants. We think that we could treat soft tissue damage all throughout the body. So when you start to think about, applications in craniomaxillofacial surgery, if you start to think about the spine as well, degenerative disc disease is a very similar problem. And then also plastic surgery, there could even be applications there. And so we think that there's probably a $10 billion opportunity for the technology as a platform. And that's, again, just annually and just in the US. So, really, really, really big opportunity for this technology to really make a big impact.
Do you have a website or something that people can go look at and find out more about your company?
Yeah,
doctors, investors, potential employees.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's very straightforward. Our website is just www.nanochon.com. And I'm sure you'll put the link in the description, but that's spelled Nanochon for anyone who's listening. And there's information about the market, about the technology, information for investors, information for surgeons, and information for patients. So it's a great resource. Also, if you're on LinkedIn, we have a pretty active LinkedIn page. We're always posting updates there. So another great way to kind of follow news and progress about us.
Thanks again for your time. We really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you again soon and following the massive success of this company and the other things that you do. Take care and have a beautiful day of life.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Same to you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.